We got a call. Woman matching your description, walking out with unpaid merchandise.
That wasn't me, officer. Look in my bags. I'll show you every receipt.
Save the excuses. We'll check the bags after you're in cuffs.
Sergeant Bailey caught Natasha's wrist, pulled it behind her back, and cuffed her before she could respond.
I'm telling you, this is a mistake. I've asked you to check my bags. Nothing in there is stolen.
That's what every shoplifter says when they're in cuffs, so save the innocent act because I'm not buying it.
Sergeant, maybe we should just take a look in her bag right here.
You question me in front of a suspect again, we're gonna have a problem, Smith.
What Bailey didn't know was that the woman standing silently in cuffs was his new commanding officer. Natasha Romer Connor stood in front of the mirror and turned to the side. The blazer fit well across her shoulders. She liked that. In 3 days, she would be Captain Romer Connor. First one in her family to wear a badge that high. She still couldn't believe it when she said it out loud. She had come to the Fairhaven Galleria to find something sharp to wear at her swearing-in. Something that said, "I belong here," before she even opened her mouth. She pulled another blazer off the hanger and slipped it on over her t-shirt. Her tote bag sat on the bench behind her. Inside it, wrapped in a soft cloth, was her new badge, a real captain's shield, heavy and gold, that nobody outside the department had seen yet. Next to it sat a folded letter from Chief Marlon Austin, the man who had picked her for the job. The letter had her start date typed right on it. She hadn't even touched the badge since she got it. She wanted Monday to be the first time she pinned it on. A few racks over, a woman moved fast. She wasn't trying on clothes. She was watching the door. The woman grabbed 2 shirts off a rack, folded them quick, and tucked them under her arm like they belonged to her already. Then she walked out of the store like nothing happened. Emily Frank, the store's loss prevention manager, caught it from the corner of her eye, but only the tail end. By the time she grabbed her radio, the woman was already gone into the crowd. Female, dark hair, maybe 5'6", left the store near the food court entrance, Emily said into her radio, breathing hard. She's got merchandise on her, didn't pay. That was it. That was the whole description. By the time it reached mall security, it had changed. By the time it reached Sergeant Donald Bailey and his partner Tristan Smith on patrol, it was even worse. Just black female, shoplifting, near the food court. Natasha paid nothing for anything. She hadn't taken a single item that wasn't returned to the rack. She grabbed her tote bag, slung it over her shoulder, and walked out of the store with her own shopping bags in hand, heading toward the parking garage. She had no idea 2 officers were already looking for her. Bailey spotted her first. He didn't check the timestamp. He didn't check the direction she'd come from. He saw a black woman near the food court, and that was enough for him. "That's her," Bailey said, already moving. "Let's go." Smith hesitated. "You sure? The description was pretty thin, man." "I said that's her." They cut across the corridor and blocked Natasha's path before she even saw them coming. "Ma'am, stop right there," Bailey said, his hand already closing around her arm. Natasha stopped. She didn't pull away. "Can I help you, officer? You can start by telling me what you took from that store." "I didn't take anything. I was trying on jackets." "I can show you my—" "Save it." Bailey's grip tightened. "We got a call. Woman matching your description, walking out with merchandise." "That wasn't me." Natasha kept her voice level, even though her heart had started pounding. "Look in my bags. I'll show you every receipt." Bailey wasn't listening. He was performing now, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "You people always got a story ready, don't you?" A woman nearby gasped. Someone else pulled out a phone. "Sir, I have not done anything wrong," Natasha said, still calm, still steady, even as her hands started to shake. I'm asking you to slow down and let me explain. You can explain it at the station. Bailey spun her around, hard, and yanked her wrist behind her back. Sarge! Smith started, watching the crowd, watching his partner's body cam light blink red. She's resisting, Bailey said loudly, for the camera, for the crowd, for the report he was already writing in his head. Stop resisting, ma'am. Natasha wasn't resisting. She wasn't moving at all. The cuffs clicked shut around her wrists, cold and tight. My name is Natasha Romer Connor, she said, loud enough for the phones pointed at her to catch every word. I want a supervisor. Now. Bailey smiled like he'd won something. Move, he said, and pushed her forward, past the staring crowd, toward the security office at the end of the hall. The mall corridor had gone quiet in the way a room goes quiet right before something bad happens. Phones stayed up. Feet stopped moving. Everybody wanted to see what happened next, but nobody wanted to be the one to say something. Natasha walked with her hands cuffed behind her back, her chin up, her shopping bags left behind on the floor where Bailey had knocked them out of her hands. She could feel eyes on her from every direction. She kept her breathing slow. She had trained other officers on how to stay calm in tense situations. Now she had to use it on herself. Sergeant, you're making a mistake, she said, her voice even. I asked you to check my bags. There's no merchandise in there that isn't mine. Yeah, that's what they all say, Bailey said, not even looking at her. Smith walked a step behind, quiet, his eyes darting between his partner and the woman he was helping drag through a public mall in handcuffs. Something about this felt wrong to him, but he didn't say it out loud. Not yet. Sarge, maybe we should just take a look in her bag, right here, Smith said. Before we go any further. Bailey shot him a look. You question me in front of a suspect again? We're gonna have a problem, Smith. Smith shut his mouth. Natasha caught that exchange. She filed it away. Smith wasn't like Bailey. Not yet, anyway. But he wasn't stopping him either. They reached a store with big glass windows, and a man inside stopped mid-sentence to stare. A woman standing near him pulled out her phone, angling it at Natasha and the officers walking her past. Natasha didn't look at the phone. She looked straight ahead. You don't have to do this, Natasha said. I've told you my name. I've offered to show you ID. I've offered to let you search my bag. What more do you want from me? I want you to stop talking, Bailey snapped. I haven't raised my voice once. You're arguing with me. That's the same thing. It wasn't the same thing, and both of them knew it. But Bailey wasn't interested in what was true. He was interested in being right, and he'd already decided he was right the second he laid eyes on her. They stopped in the middle of the corridor for a second, while Bailey radioed ahead to the mall's security substation, letting them know he was bringing in a suspect. His voice was loud and clipped, the kind of voice a man uses when he wants everyone around him to know he's in charge. She giving you any trouble, boss? A mall security guard asked, jogging up to join them, eyeing Natasha like she was something dangerous. Not yet, Bailey said. But she's got an attitude on her. Natasha almost laughed. An attitude. She had said maybe 15 words this entire time, every single one of them calm and clear. But she understood, in that moment, exactly what game was being played. It didn't matter what she said. It didn't matter how calm she stayed. Bailey had already written the story in his head, and nothing she did was going to change the ending he wanted. So she stopped trying to change it. For now, she walked. She kept her back straight. She let the cuffs bite into her wrists without flinching, because flinching was exactly what he wanted to see. The crowd thickened as they moved toward the far end of the mall, past the food court, past a row of benches where an elderly couple sat frozen, watching. A teenager filmed the whole thing on his phone, whispering something to his friend. Natasha heard the word crazy float past her, though she couldn't tell if it was aimed at her or at the officer. By the time they reached the security substation, a small office tucked behind a directory sign, with a metal desk and a single window, Bailey was practically pulling her by the arm, eager to get her inside and finish what he'd started. "Sit," he said, shoving her toward a plastic chair. Natasha sat. She kept her eyes on him the whole time, steady and unblinking, refusing to look away first. "Now," Bailey said, dropping her tote bag hard onto the metal counter. "Let's see what you were really trying to walk out of here with." He reached for the zipper. Natasha's stomach dropped, not because she had anything to hide, but because she knew exactly what was sitting inside that bag, wrapped in cloth, 3 days away from becoming real. Bailey's hand paused on the zipper of the tote bag. He looked up at Natasha, like he wanted to see her sweat before he opened it. She gave him nothing. Just steady eyes, steady breath, hands still cuffed behind her back in the plastic chair. "You're awful calm for someone about to get caught," he said. "I'm calm because I have nothing to be afraid of," Natasha said. "You'll see that in about 2 seconds." Smith stood near the door, arms crossed, watching this whole thing unfold with a knot growing tighter in his stomach. He kept replaying the radio call in his head. Female, dark hair, 5'6". That was it. That was the entire description they'd gotten. And somewhere between the radio and Bailey's ears, it had turned into a certainty. "Let me get my ID out myself," Natasha said. "I can point you right to it if you uncuff one of my hands." "I don't take orders from suspects," Bailey said. "I'm not giving you an order. I'm trying to make this faster for both of us." Bailey ignored her. He wanted to be the one to find whatever was in that bag. He wanted the moment. So instead of listening, instead of doing the simple thing that would have ended this whole mess in 30 seconds, he grabbed the bottom of the tote and turned it upside down over the counter. Everything spilled out at once. A wallet, a set of keys, a tube of lip balm that rolled off the edge and hit the floor. And then, heavier than everything else, wrapped in a soft black cloth that came loose as it fell, something hit the counter with a hard, unmistakable clink of metal on metal. The cloth fell away. A gold badge sat there under the fluorescent lights. Not a patrol officer's badge. Not a sergeant's badge. A captain's shield, polished and new, catching the light, like it was daring anyone in the room to look away from it. Next to it landed a folded letter. It had slid halfway open when it hit the counter, and the letterhead was clearly visible. Office of the Chief of Police. Fairhaven Police Department. Nobody moved. Bailey stared down at the badge like it might disappear if he blinked hard enough. Smith had gone still by the door, his mouth slightly open. He was the first one to say anything. "Sarge," he said quietly. "Sarge, look at the letter." Bailey picked it up with shaking hands. He read it once, fast, then again, slower, like the words might rearrange themselves into something less terrifying the second time through. This letter confirms the appointment of Natasha Romer Connor as Captain, Fairhaven Police Department, effective Monday, 3 days away. "This," Bailey started, then stopped. He looked at Natasha, really looked at her, like he was seeing her face for the first time. "This isn't official yet. You're not sworn in. This doesn't count for anything right now." Natasha turned her head slowly to face him, cuffs still biting into her wrists. "It counts for everything, Sergeant," she said. "Whether I'm wearing that badge or not, I never took anything from that store. I never resisted you. I never gave you a single reason to put your hands on me. You did that because you looked at me and decided I was guilty before I said one word." Bailey's jaw worked, but nothing came out. For the first time since he'd grabbed her arm in that corridor, he had no comeback ready. No script to fall back on. "Uncuff her," Smith said, moving forward now, some of his hesitation burning off into something closer to urgency. "Sarge, uncuff her right now." Bailey fumbled with the key, his hands clumsy, and the cuffs finally clicked open. Natasha rubbed her wrists slowly, red marks already rising on her skin. "Look," Bailey muttered, not quite meeting her eyes. "We got a call. I responded to a call. That's the job." It wasn't an apology, not even close. It was an excuse dressed up to sound like one, and Natasha wasn't interested in wearing it. "This isn't over," she said quietly, gathering her things off the counter with steady hands, sliding her badge back into its cloth like it was something sacred that had almost been ruined by the room around it. She walked out of the substation without another word, leaving Bailey standing there holding a letter that had just turned his entire world sideways. The second the door shut behind her, Bailey grabbed his phone off his belt and dialed a number he knew by heart. Deputy Chief Piper Schuyler's direct line. He needed to get ahead of this before it got ahead of him. Schuyler picked up on the second ring. "This better be good, Bailey. I'm in a meeting. We got a problem." Bailey's voice was low, fast, the kind of fast that came from panic instead of urgency. He stepped into the hallway outside the substation, glancing back to make sure Smith wasn't listening. "That shoplifting call from the food court. I picked up a woman matching the description. Turns out she's not just some random woman." "Who is she?" "Romer Connor, the new captain, the one starting Monday." Silence on the other end. Then, sharper. "Say that again." "I cuffed her, Piper. In front of half the mall. Somebody's probably got video of it already." He rubbed the back of his neck, pacing a small circle. "Look, I responded to a call. That's on record. I did what any officer would do with the information I had." Schuyler's voice went flat and businesslike, the sound of a woman already 3 steps ahead of the conversation. "Did she resist?" Bailey hesitated. "Not exactly. But she was combative. Talking back the whole time, arguing with me in front of a crowd. I documented it that way on my body cam. That was a lie, and some small part of Bailey knew it was a lie even as he said it. Natasha had never raised her voice. She'd offered her ID, she'd offered her bag. But the truth wasn't going to protect him right now. The story was. "Okay," Schuyler said slowly. "Okay. Don't say anything else to her. Don't apologize on record, don't admit fault, don't talk to any press if this hits social media. I'll handle it from my end." What does handle it mean? It means I'm still overseeing personnel matters during her transition period. And I intend to make sure this doesn't spiral into something that costs either of us our jobs. Just get me your incident report by end of day. Make it clean." Bailey let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Piper. Don't thank me yet." She hung up first. Schuyler sat at her desk a long moment after the call ended, staring at nothing, turning the problem over in her mind like a stone she was looking for cracks in. A new captain, a black woman, no less, humiliated and cuffed by one of her own sergeants 3 days before her swearing in. If this got out the way it happened, it wouldn't just end Bailey's career, it would blow open every question the department had spent years trying to keep buried. Questions about who got stopped, and why, and how often, and what happened to the complaints when they came in. She wasn't protecting Bailey because she liked him. She barely tolerated him. She was protecting the machine, and Bailey was just a gear in it that had ground too loud this time. She opened a blank file on her computer and started typing. Not a complaint. Not yet. Just notes. Observations. The beginning of a narrative she could shape later if she needed to. A narrative where the real problem wasn't a sergeant with a pattern of bad stops, but a new captain who might turn out to be difficult, litigious, hard to work with. A liability if the story needed telling that way. She had done this before. Not often, but enough to know exactly how it worked. Back at the mall, Natasha stood outside the substation entrance, tote bag back over her shoulder, badge tucked safely against her side. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, though the red marks on her wrists hadn't faded yet. She pulled out her own phone and called Chief Austin directly. He picked up fast. "Natasha, everything all right?" "No," she said. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything." She told him everything: the corridor, the cuffs, the badge spilling out on the counter, Bailey's non-apology. Austin went quiet on the other end, his silence heavy with a fury he was clearly working to control before speaking. "Get me his badge number," Austin finally said. "And Natasha, I am so sorry this happened to you." "Don't be sorry yet," Natasha said, walking toward the parking garage, the mall lights blurring past her. "Save that for after we see what happens when I actually put my badge on." She hung up and kept walking, already turning the day over in her mind, already deciding this would not be the last conversation Sergeant Donald Bailey and Deputy Chief Piper Schuyler had about her. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Natasha kept both hands on the wheel, even though her right wrist still throbbed where the cuffs had bitten into it. Every red light gave her too much time to think, and thinking wasn't helping much right now. She kept seeing Bailey's face in that corridor, the certainty in it, like he'd already decided who she was before she opened her mouth. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Austin calling back. "I pulled up the sergeant's file while we were talking," he said. No greeting, straight to it. "Donald Bailey, 15 years on the force. 2 prior complaints in his jacket, both from mall patrol." "What kind of complaints?" "Vague. Excessive force, one of them. The others marked resolved, no further action." "That usually means somebody made it go away quietly." Natasha's stomach tightened. "That's not comforting, Marlon." "It's not meant to be. It's meant to tell you what you're walking into." He paused. "Natasha, I want you to document everything that happened today. Times, names, what was said. Not for a lawsuit, for the record. Once you're sworn in, you'll have the standing to actually do something about it. Right now, you're a civilian who got arrested. Monday, you're his commanding officer." 3 days, Natasha said quietly. 3 days, Austin agreed. "Hang in there. I mean that." She thanked him and hung up, but the knot in her chest didn't loosen. She pulled into her driveway a few minutes later, sat in the car with the engine off, and just breathed for a while before going inside. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with a notepad, writing down everything while it was still fresh. The exact words Bailey used, the exact moment he grabbed her arm before she'd said a single sentence. The way he'd narrated her as combative into his body cam while she stood there in silence. She wrote it all down in careful, even handwriting, the same steady hand she'd used to write an incident report for anyone else. She didn't cry. She'd promised herself a long time ago she wasn't going to give people like Bailey her tears. She was going to give them consequences instead. Back at headquarters that same evening, Schuyler sat later than usual, going through Natasha's incoming personnel file with a highlighter in hand. Officially, her role during the transition period gave her oversight of administrative and personnel matters until the new captain was formally seated. It was a technicality nobody had thought much about when they wrote the succession policy. Schuyler intended to use every inch of it. She flagged Natasha's onboarding paperwork for additional review, a phrase that meant nothing and everything at the same time. It would sit in a queue for days, maybe longer, delaying things that should have taken an afternoon. She made a note in the margin, small and deliberate. Possible liability concerns. Monitor closely. Bailey's incident report landed in her inbox an hour later. She read through it once, noted the careful language. Subject appeared combative, verbally resistant during initial contact, and filed it without changes. It would become the department's official account of what happened in that mall corridor. Not because it was true, because nobody with the authority to challenge it had signed off on anything yet. Natasha, sitting alone in her kitchen 2 miles away, had no idea any of this was happening. She finished her notes, folded the pages carefully, and slid them into a folder she labeled simply Monday. Her phone buzzed one more time before she went to bed. A text from Austin. "Looking forward to seeing you in uniform, Captain. One more thing. Take a look at your org chart when you get a chance. Figured you'd want a heads up before Monday morning surprises you." Natasha frowned, pulled up the department directory on her laptop, and scrolled down through the mall precinct's chain of command. There it was, near the bottom of a list that would report directly up through her office. Sergeant Donald Bailey, Mall Patrol Division. She sat back in her chair and stared at the screen for a long moment, the cursor blinking beside his name. 3 days from now, the man who had cuffed her in front of a crowd of strangers, who had called her combative for standing still and speaking calmly, who had dumped her badge onto a counter like it was evidence against her, that man was going to walk into her department and call her captain. Natasha closed the laptop slowly. "We'll see about that," she said quietly to the empty kitchen, and went to bed already thinking about Monday morning. Monday morning came fast. Natasha stood in front of the mirror in her apartment one more time, but this time there was no blazer to choose. This time it was the real thing. Dark blue uniform, silver buttons, and pinned above her heart, the badge that had spilled out onto a counter 3 days ago in front of a man who never expected to see her wear it. She pinned it on slowly. Her hands didn't shake this time. At headquarters, Chief Austin swore her in with a short ceremony in the main hall. Just her, him, and a handful of officers who clapped politely, not knowing what had happened at the mall that Friday. Natasha shook Austin's hand, feeling the weight of the badge settle into place, like it had always belonged there. Then she walked straight into roll call. The room went quiet the second she stepped through the door. Officers straightened in their chairs. Bailey sat near the back, arms crossed, a small smug smile on his face, like he'd already decided this whole thing had blown over. Smith sat a few rows up, eyes down, still carrying the weight of what he'd watched happen in that corridor. "Good morning," Natasha said, standing at the front of the room, her voice calm and even. "For those I haven't met yet, I'm Captain Romer Connor. I'll be leading this division starting today." A few nods, a few murmurs of respect. "Before we get into the schedule," she continued, "I want to read something out loud." She pulled a printed page from a folder under her arm. Bailey's smile faded slightly, though he still didn't seem worried. "Not yet. This is an incident report filed this past Friday," Natasha said. "I'm going to read it exactly as it was written." She read it, word for word. Subject appeared combative, verbally resistant during initial contact. Officer used necessary force to ensure compliance. The room stayed dead silent. A few officers exchanged glances. Word had already spread through the department grapevine about a woman getting cuffed at the mall Friday. Some had heard she made a scene. Others had heard it was a bad stop. Nobody in that room, except Smith and Bailey, knew the woman in the report, and the woman standing at the front of the room were the same person. Natasha lowered the page. "I want you all to know something," she said. "I was that subject. I never raised my voice. I never resisted. I stood still and asked to speak to a supervisor while I was cuffed in front of a crowd of strangers for a crime I didn't commit." She let that sit in the room for a moment. "This report you just heard is not what happened, and I read it to you so you understand exactly what we're going to be talking about going forward, what accountability actually looks like in this department, starting today." Bailey's face had gone pale, then red. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then thought better of it in a room full of witnesses. "Sergeant Bailey," Natasha said, turning to face him directly. Effective immediately, you're being reassigned off-mall and downtown patrol to overnight shift, pending further review of Friday's incident. A few officers shifted in their seats, sensing the temperature of the room change completely. Bailey's jaw tightened, but he said nothing out loud. Not here. Not in front of everyone. That's all for this morning, Natasha said. Let's get to work. The room emptied slowly, officers murmuring to each other as they filed out, glancing back at Bailey like they were seeing him differently already. Smith lingered a moment, catching Natasha's eye briefly before he left, something unreadable passing between them. Bailey didn't linger. The second the room cleared enough, he was up and moving fast, his boots hitting the hallway floor hard, heading straight for the stairwell that led up to the administrative offices. He didn't knock when he reached Deputy Chief Schuyler's door. He just pushed it open. "She just pulled me off mall patrol," he said, breathing hard, "in front of the whole department. Humiliated me in roll call like I'm some rookie." Schuyler looked up slowly from her desk, unbothered, like she'd been expecting this visit before it even happened. "Sit down, Donald," she said, "and let's talk about how we're going to fix this." Bailey sat across from Schuyler's desk, still breathing hard from the walk up the stairwell. "She can't just do that," he said. "Pull me off my post in front of 40 officers? That's humiliation. That's retaliation, plain and simple." Schuyler leaned back in her chair, unhurried, the way she always looked when she was already 3 moves ahead of whoever was sitting across from her. "Retaliation for what, exactly?" "For Friday." Bailey's voice dropped, like saying it quieter might make it smaller. "For the mall thing. The mall thing where you cuffed the incoming captain in front of a crowd and called her combative when your own body cam is going to show she never raised her voice?" Schuyler said it flatly, no judgment in her tone, just fact laid out on the table between them. Bailey's face went tight. "I responded to a call. I did my job. I know what you did." Schuyler folded her hands on the desk. "The question is what we do next." She reminded him, slow and deliberate, of something she'd already explained on the phone Friday night, that during the transition period, before a new captain's authority was fully absorbed into department policy, personnel matters within a precinct still technically ran through her office. It was a leftover clause from an old succession policy nobody had bothered updating in years. Most captains never even knew it existed, because most transitions never needed it tested. Natasha's did. "You have union protections," Schuyler continued. "A reassignment like this, made without a formal review process, made emotionally, in front of the whole department. That's grounds for a grievance. File it today. I'll have it in front of me by tomorrow morning. And then what? And then I overturn it. Cite procedural failure. Put you back on mall patrol where you belong." Bailey sat back, some of the panic draining out of his shoulders. "You do that? After what happened?" Schuyler's eyes were flat and steady. "Donald, I'm not doing this because I think you handled Friday well. I think you handled it badly. But this department has spent 3 years managing situations like this quietly, and I intend to keep managing them quietly. A new captain making examples of officers in her first hour on the job isn't good for anyone. Not you, not me, not her, whether she realizes that yet or not." Bailey nodded slowly, some of his old confidence creeping back into his posture. "So I file today." "Today," Schuyler confirmed. "I'll have it processed by Wednesday." Wednesday morning, an internal memo landed in Natasha's inbox before she'd even finished her coffee. She read it twice, just to be sure she wasn't misunderstanding it. Per grievance filed by Sergeant D. Bailey and reviewed under Transitional Personnel Oversight. The reassignment dated Monday is hereby overturned. Sergeant Bailey is reinstated to prior post, effective immediately. No conversation, no warning. Just a memo, signed by Skylar, undoing Natasha's first real decision as captain 2 days after she'd made it, in front of the entire department that had watched her make it. Natasha sat very still at her desk for a long moment, feeling something hot and sharp rise up in her chest before she forced it back down. This wasn't just about Bailey anymore. She understood that now, clearly, for the first time. Bailey was one bad officer with bad instincts and a badge he didn't deserve to carry. But somebody with real power inside this department had just made a decision to protect him over her. Quietly, procedurally, with a memo instead of a conversation, using rules Natasha hadn't even known existed until they were used against her. If they could undo her decisions this easily, paperwork alone wasn't going to be enough. She needed something they couldn't argue away with a technicality. Something solid. Something with a timestamp. She thought back to Friday, to the mall, to the loss prevention manager who had made that panicked radio call in the first place. If there was security footage from that store, real footage, showing the actual shoplifter, showing exactly when Natasha walked out empty-handed, that wasn't something Skylar could bury in a memo. Natasha picked up her desk phone and dialed the main number for the Fairhaven Galleria. "Loss prevention office, please," she said. "I need to speak with someone named Emily Frank." Emily Frank was already nervous before Natasha even walked into the loss prevention office. She'd been the one who made that garbled call Friday. She'd been replaying it in her head all weekend, wondering how a 5-second glance at a fast-moving shoplifter had somehow ended with a woman in handcuffs who hadn't taken anything at all. When the mall directory told her the captain of Fairhaven PD wanted to speak with her personally, her stomach had dropped straight to the floor. "Ms. Frank," Natasha said, stepping into the small back office lined with monitors, "thank you for making time for me." "Of course. Please, sit." Emily gestured to a chair, her hands fidgeting with a lanyard around her neck. "Captain, I want you to know, I never meant for any of that to happen the way it did. My radio call was rushed, and by the time it reached the officers—" "I know," Natasha said, cutting in gently. "I'm not here to blame you. I'm here because I think you have something that can help me." Emily let out a breath. "The footage." "The footage," Natasha confirmed. "From Friday. I need to see exactly what happened before that call went out. The real shoplifter, the timestamp, all of it." Emily turned to her computer without hesitation and pulled up the store's security system. She scrubbed back through Friday's footage until she found it. Grainy, but clear enough. A woman, dark hair, moving fast between racks, tucking 2 shirts under her arm before slipping out a side exit near the food court. The timestamp in the corner read 2:47 p.m. Then Emily pulled up a second angle. Natasha, in the dressing room hallway, at 2:51 p.m., 4 minutes later, calmly paying for nothing because she'd bought nothing, walking out the front entrance with her own bags in plain view. "That's it," Natasha said quietly, staring at the screen. "That's everything." "I can get you an official copy," Emily said. "Chain of custody, signed and dated, sent straight to your office." "Please do, as soon as possible." Emily promised she would, and Natasha left the office feeling, for the first time in days, like she had solid ground under her feet. But solid ground didn't last long. 2 days later, a mall security guard mentioned Natasha's footage request to a friend on patrol. Casual conversation, nothing meant by it. That friend happened to still be close with Bailey, who'd been asking around, quietly, about whether anyone at the mall had heard from the new captain since Wednesday. By Thursday evening, Bailey had a name and a phone number. He called Emily's manager directly, not Emily herself, careful not to leave a trail straight back to him, and made it sound casual, like a favor between people who understood how things worked. A word here, a suggestion there, about how footage requests tied to ongoing personnel disputes could get complicated for a small mall office. how it might be easier for everyone if that particular file just quietly disappeared from the system before it became evidence in something bigger. The manager, not wanting trouble, agreed. Friday morning, Emily went to pull the official copy for Natasha's office and found the file gone. Not archived. Not misplaced. Deleted from the system entirely, with no record of who'd done it or when. Her stomach turned cold. She thought about calling Natasha right then to explain. But something stopped her. A flicker of instinct. The same instinct that had made her feel wrong about that garbled radio call in the first place. Before the footage disappeared, she had done something she hadn't told anyone about yet. Late Wednesday night, worried this exact thing might happen, she'd quietly copied the footage onto her own personal external drive and taken it home with her. She hadn't told Natasha. She hadn't told her manager. She wasn't even sure why she'd done it, except that something about the whole situation had felt wrong from the beginning, and she didn't trust it to stay solved just because a captain had asked a few questions. Now she was glad she had. Friday afternoon, Natasha received an apologetic call from the mall's IT department, explaining that the requested footage appeared to have been lost due to a system error during a routine data cleanup. Natasha sat at her desk after hanging up, jaw tight, staring at the wall. Convenient, she thought. Too convenient. She didn't know yet that the footage still existed, safe on a drive in Emily Frank's apartment. All she knew was that somebody, somewhere, had made sure the one piece of hard evidence in her favor had vanished right when she needed it most. And that meant somebody was still working against her. Even now. Even with her badge on. Natasha asked her assistant to schedule 15 minutes with Officer Tristan Smith the following Monday. No reason given on the calendar invite. She wanted him to come in without rehearsing an answer first. Smith knocked on her office door right on time, looking like a man walking into a dentist's chair. "Captain," he said, standing stiff in the doorway. "You wanted to see me?" "Sit down, Tristan." Natasha gestured to the chair across from her desk. "This isn't a disciplinary meeting. I just want to talk." He sat, but he didn't relax. "I'm not going to ask you to rat out your sergeant," Natasha said. "I'm going to ask you a simple question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer it. What did you actually see on Friday? Not what went in the report. What you saw with your own eyes." Smith was quiet for a long moment, his hands pressed flat against his knees. Natasha let the silence sit. She'd learned a long time ago that people filled silence with truth, if you gave them enough room to do it. "I saw a woman who didn't do anything," Smith finally said, his voice low. "I saw Sergeant Bailey grab your arm before you said a single word to him. I heard him say, before we even got close to you, 'I don't like her attitude already.' And you hadn't opened your mouth yet. That's on my body cam. All of it." Natasha kept her face still, though something in her chest tightened at hearing it confirmed out loud. "Why hasn't that footage been turned over yet, Tristan?" Smith looked down at his hands. "Sarge told me body cam footage tied to a formal complaint gets reviewed by the sergeant first, before it goes anywhere else. Standard procedure," he said. "I didn't question it. I should have." "That's not the policy," Natasha said quietly. She pulled a printed page from her desk drawer and slid it across to him. "Footage connected to a formal misconduct complaint bypasses the reporting sergeant entirely and goes straight to internal affairs. It's been the policy for 6 years. He lied to you." Smith read the page twice, his jaw working. "He told me it protected me. Said if I just sent it up through him, it'd look better for both of us." "It protected him," Natasha said. "Not you." Smith sat with that for a moment, something shifting behind his eyes, guilt curdling into something closer to anger. "What happens if I file it correctly now? Through IA, like it should have gone in the first place? Then the truth is on record. permanently, where nobody can quietly delete it. Natasha leaned forward slightly. I'm not going to pretend there won't be consequences for you internally. Bailey's not going to like it. But I think you already know that not saying anything has its own consequences, too. Smith nodded slowly, then stood up straighter than he had all meeting. I'll file it today. He did. That afternoon, Smith walked his body cam footage directly to Internal Affairs himself, bypassing Bailey entirely, filing it exactly the way policy required. Once it was logged into the system, it was permanent. No manager could quietly delete it the way the mall footage had disappeared. Bailey found out by Wednesday. He didn't confront Smith directly. That wasn't his style when he didn't have the upper hand anymore. Instead, he started small. Smith's usual shift trades stopped going through. Requests that used to get approved without a second look suddenly needed further review. Officers who used to save him a seat at the diner after shift started looking the other way, murmuring that Smith had gone and turned on his own partner, that he wasn't someone you could trust to have your back anymore. By Friday evening, Smith sat alone at a corner table at the diner, coffee going cold in front of him, watching the table where he used to sit fill up with other officers, laughing about something he wasn't part of anymore. Nobody said anything cruel to his face. Nobody had to. The empty seat across from him said enough. He thought about calling Natasha to tell her what was happening, but he didn't want to sound like he regretted doing the right thing. He didn't regret it. He just hadn't expected doing the right thing to feel this lonely. He drank the rest of his cold coffee, paid his tab, and drove home in silence. The body cam footage he'd filed sitting somewhere in a system now, permanent and untouchable. The one thing in this whole mess he knew for certain he'd gotten right. With Smith's body cam footage now locked permanently into the Internal Affairs system, Natasha took her next step. She sat down at her desk on Monday morning and filed a formal complaint against Sergeant Donald Bailey herself, not as a woman who'd been wronged at a mall, but as a captain with the standing to force the department to answer for it. Her rank gave her something she hadn't had a week ago. She used it to demand a hearing date be set on the calendar, in writing, with a copy sent to Deputy Chief Schuyler's office as a courtesy. Schuyler's response came back slow. Too slow. Days passed. Then a week. Every time Natasha followed up, she got the same answer wrapped in different language. The review board's schedule was full. The paperwork needed additional signatures. A procedural step had to be completed before the hearing could be officially calendared. None of it was a flat no. All of it added up to a delay with no end in sight. Natasha recognized the tactic for what it was. She'd used similar tactics herself years ago, back when she was junior and learning how department politics actually worked underneath the official rulebook. Somebody who couldn't say no outright would just make sure yes never quite arrived. If she couldn't move forward through the front door, she'd build a case so solid it couldn't be quietly filed away, no matter how many procedural knots got tied around it. She started pulling old case files, not Bailey's personnel record. She'd already seen that, and it was thin by design. She went further back, into old complaint archives from the mall precinct, cross-referencing names, dates, locations. It took her most of a week, working late most nights after her official hours ended, the office quiet except for the hum of the copier. What she found made her sit back in her chair and stare at the screen for a long time. 3 prior complaints. All from the same mall. All from black patrons over the past 3 years. All describing something close to what had happened to her. Stopped without cause, treated with hostility. Held longer than necessary before being released without charges. Every single one of them had been resolved the same way. Quietly, quickly, with a signed non-disclosure agreement attached, and no further action taken against the officer involved. Every one of those settlements bore the same signature at the bottom, authorizing the resolution and closing the file. Deputy Chief Piper Schuyler. Natasha sat with that for a long moment, feeling something cold settle into her chest, replacing the anger she'd been carrying since the mall. This wasn't one bad sergeant with poor instincts anymore. This was a pattern the department had known about, buried and paid to keep quiet 3 separate times, long before she'd ever walked into that store. And the woman slow-walking her hearing right now was the same woman who'd been signing off on the silence for years. Natasha understood, with total clarity, exactly what she was up against. She wasn't fighting one man's ego anymore. She was fighting a system that had been protecting itself long before she arrived, and she was now the first person inside it with both the evidence and the rank to actually blow it open. That made her dangerous to them. She knew that. She started making copies of everything that same night. The old complaints, the settlement records, Smith's filed body cam footage, her own written account from the day of her arrest. Building a single case file, thorough and complete, that no memo or procedural delay could make disappear. Across the building, in an office with the blinds drawn, Schuyler sat across from Bailey, both of them quiet for a moment after she'd finished explaining what her contact in records had just told her. That the new captain had spent the better part of a week pulling old mall precinct files, going back years. "She's not just going after me," Bailey said slowly, understanding dawning on his face. "She's going after the whole thing. She's going after both of us," Schuyler corrected, her voice tight. "And if she gets that hearing on the calendar with everything she's found, we're not looking at a grievance anymore. We're looking at criminal referrals, careers ending, mine included." Bailey leaned forward. "So what do we do?" Schuyler was quiet for a moment, turning something over in her mind, weighing options that had nothing to do with procedure anymore. "We stop her," she said finally, "before she gets the chance." By the following week, Natasha had everything assembled. Smith's body cam footage permanently logged with internal affairs. The 3 old complaints from the mall precinct, each one settled quietly and signed off by Schuyler. Her own written account of the arrest, timestamps and all. She'd even reached back out to Emily Frank, asking gently whether any backup of the original store footage might still exist somewhere, even after the official copy had vanished. Emily had gone quiet on the phone for a second too long before answering that she'd check. Natasha organized it all into a single case file, thick and complete, copied 3 separate times so no single missing folder could stop it. She called Councilwoman Olivia Maison's office directly, requesting time in front of the city's Police Oversight Committee, a body with the authority to review complaints independent of the department itself, outside Schuyler's reach entirely. Maison's office scheduled her for the following Monday. Natasha allowed herself, for the first time in weeks, to feel something close to relief. The hearing was set. The evidence was solid. Smith's footage couldn't be deleted. The old complaints couldn't be explained away as coincidence. She'd built something Schuyler couldn't quietly bury with a memo. She spent the weekend rehearsing what she'd say, laying the copies out on her kitchen table in order, feeling for the first time like the ground under her feet was actually solid. Sunday night, her phone rang. It was Austin's replacement in administration, a voice she barely recognized, formal and stiff. "Captain Romer Connor, I'm calling to inform you that effective immediately, you're being placed on administrative leave pending an internal review." Natasha went very still. "On what grounds?" "An anonymous complaint was filed against you Friday evening, alleging misuse of your position to pursue a personal vendetta against a subordinate officer. Given the seriousness of the allegation, Deputy Chief Schuyler has authorized immediate leave pending investigation." "That complaint is fabricated," Natasha said, her voice tight but level. "You understand that, right? I have a hearing scheduled tomorrow morning with the City Oversight Committee. That hearing has been postponed indefinitely, pending the outcome of this review," the voice said, almost apologetic now, like even he could hear how convenient the timing was. "You'll need to surrender your badge and building access until further notice." Natasha sat down slowly at her kitchen table, the copies of her case file still spread out in front of her, and let the words sink in. They'd found a way to stop her without ever touching the evidence. They didn't need to disprove anything she'd gathered. They just needed to remove her from the room before anyone official ever saw it. She thought about calling Smith, but her calls to him over the past few days had already started going unanswered. Short, delayed texts instead of his usual quick replies. She understood why. He'd watched what happened to people who pushed against this system from the inside. He was scared, and she couldn't blame him for that, even as it left her feeling more alone than she had since the day Bailey first grabbed her arm in that mall corridor. Monday morning, she drove to headquarters anyway, badge in hand, and turned it over at the front desk exactly as instructed. The officer at the desk wouldn't meet her eyes. Word had already spread. She walked back out to her car in the parking lot she used to walk into as captain and sat behind the wheel for a long time without starting the engine. It felt like the entire system had closed its fist around her at once. Bailey still working, Skylar still in power, the hearing gone, her badge gone, even Smith gone quiet. Everything she'd built over the past 3 weeks seemed to be collapsing in a single weekend. But when she finally looked over at the passenger seat, something was still sitting there, untouched by any of it. The manila folder, copied 3 times, complete. They could suspend her badge. They could postpone her hearing. They could isolate her from every ally inside the building. But they couldn't touch the one thing that didn't require a badge or a building access card to matter. The truth, sitting in black and white, addressed by hand to Councilwoman Maison's office. Natasha picked up the folder, turned it over in her hands once, and started the engine. If the department wouldn't let her walk through the front door anymore, she'd find another way in. Natasha didn't go home. She drove straight across town, the manila folder sitting on the passenger seat where it had spent the whole weekend, and pulled into the small parking lot outside the city administration building before she'd fully decided what she was going to say when she got inside. Councilwoman Olivia Maison's office was on the 3rd floor, tucked behind a set of glass doors with the city seal painted across them. Natasha hadn't called ahead. She didn't want to risk this getting quietly rerouted the way her hearing had. The receptionist looked up, a little startled by the badgeless woman standing in the doorway, with a thick folder pressed against her chest. "Can I help you?" "I need 5 minutes with Councilwoman Maison," Natasha said. "It's urgent, and it involves the Fairhaven Police Department." Something in her voice must have carried weight, because the receptionist picked up the phone instead of turning her away. 10 minutes later, Natasha sat across from Maison in a small office lined with framed community awards and photographs from ribbon cuttings. Maison was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd built her career on holding city departments accountable, and she listened to Natasha's story without interrupting once, her expression growing harder with every sentence. Natasha laid it all out on the desk between them. Smith's body cam footage, already permanently logged with internal affairs and impossible to erase. The 3 prior complaints from the mall precinct, each one settled quietly with an NDA, each one signed off by the same deputy chief. Her own written account of the day she was arrested, timestamps included. And finally, the letter confirming her sudden administrative leave, dated the exact night before her scheduled hearing. "They suspended me the night before I was supposed to present this to your committee," Natasha said. "That's not a coincidence, Councilwoman. That's a department protecting itself." Maison flipped through the file slowly, her jaw tightening as she read the settlement dates, The repeated pattern, the same signature appearing again and again at the bottom of each closed complaint. "This is bigger than one bad arrest," Maison said finally, closing the folder. "This is an institutional pattern, and it's been sitting there for years because nobody with the authority to look ever looked." "I have the authority now," Natasha said. "Or I did, until Friday night." Maison looked up at her. "You still do, as far as my committee's concerned. Administrative leave inside the department doesn't strip your standing to bring a complaint to outside oversight. That's exactly why this office exists. So a department can't quietly bury something just by controlling its own personnel." Something in Natasha's chest loosened for the first time in days. "So what happens now?" "Now I use the authority my committee has that Deputy Chief Schuyler's office doesn't." Maison pulled a legal pad toward her and started writing. "Independent subpoena power. I can compel testimony, pull records directly, and schedule an emergency public session that the department can't postpone the way they postponed your internal hearing. This isn't going through their calendar anymore. It's going through mine. How soon? Days, not weeks." Maison looked at her steadily. "I'm going to need Officer Smith to testify, on record, about that footage. And I'll need to reach the loss prevention manager from the mall. Emily Frank, you said. She may still have a copy of the original footage," Natasha said. "The official one disappeared from the system. She never confirmed it to me directly, but I have a feeling she kept something. Then we find out." Maison set down her pen. "Captain Romer Connor, I want to be honest with you. This is going to get loud. Once I call this session, it stops being a quiet internal matter and becomes a public one. Schuyler and Bailey are not going to go down without trying to drag your name through the mud on the way." Natasha thought of Bailey's voice in that mall corridor, calling her combative when she hadn't raised her voice once. She thought of the badge sitting in a drawer at headquarters that wasn't hers to wear right now. "Let them try," Natasha said. Maison almost smiled. "Then I'll have my office send out formal notices by end of day. Bailey, Schuyler, Smith, and Ms. Frank, all summoned to testify." Natasha stood, shook her hand, and walked back out through the glass doors into the hallway. The empty folder now sitting light in her arms, its contents finally in hands that couldn't be pressured into burying them. She drove home that evening, still without her badge, still technically suspended. But for the first time since Friday night, she didn't feel powerless. She felt like she'd just moved the fight to ground Schuyler couldn't control. Now all she could do was wait, and trust that everything she'd planted weeks ago, the footage, the policy, the truth Smith had chosen to file correctly, would hold when it finally came time to answer for it in public. The city council chambers were packed by 9 on the morning of the emergency session. Word had spread fast once the formal notices went out. A captain placed on leave days before testifying against her own department. A sergeant and deputy chief summoned to answer for it publicly. Reporters filled the back rows. Off-duty officers, unsure which side to stand on, sat scattered through the gallery. Natasha sat near the front, in plain clothes, no badge on her chest, watching Councilwoman Maison gavel the session into order. This committee holds independent oversight authority over complaints involving conduct within the Fairhaven Police Department, Maison said, her voice carrying easily through the room. "We're here today to examine the arrest of Captain Natasha Romer Connor and a broader pattern that has come to this committee's attention. Officer Smith, please come forward." Smith walked up slow, hands stiff at his sides, but when he sat at the witness table, he didn't hesitate. "Officer Smith, does your body cam footage from that day exist in the department's internal affairs system right now?" Maison asked. "Yes, ma'am. I filed it myself, directly with IA, 3 weeks ago." "And what does that footage show?" Smith swallowed hard. It shows Sergeant Bailey saying he didn't like her attitude before we'd even reached her. Before she said a single word to either of us. It shows her standing still, hands open, asking to see a supervisor while he cuffed her. It doesn't show her resisting. Not once. A murmur rolled through the gallery. Bailey, seated at the far table with a department lawyer beside him, stared straight ahead, jaw locked. "Why did it take 3 weeks for that footage to reach Internal Affairs, Officer Smith?" Maison asked. "Sergeant Bailey told me it needed to go through him first. That's not the actual policy. Captain Romer Connor showed me the real policy herself. I filed it correctly after that." "Thank you, Officer Smith." Maison turned toward the gallery. "Ms. Frank, please come forward." Emily walked up, carrying a small folder and a flash drive, her hands not quite steady. "Ms. Frank, the store's official security footage from that day. Where is it now?" "It was deleted from our system," Emily said. "My manager told me to remove it, after a call he got from someone connected to the department. I don't have proof of who called him directly, but I know the timing wasn't a coincidence. Do you have a copy?" Emily set the flash drive on the table in front of her. "I made a personal backup before it was deleted. I kept it because something about the whole thing felt wrong from the start." The footage played on the chamber's projector screen a moment later. The real shoplifter at 2:47, Natasha walking out empty-handed at 2:51. Dead silence settled over the room as the timestamps did what 3 weeks of arguments couldn't. Bailey shot up out of his chair. "This is a setup. Both of them are lying to save their own." "Sergeant Bailey, you'll have your turn," Maison said, cutting him off, voice like iron. "I don't need a turn," Bailey snapped, red-faced now, pointing at Natasha across the room. "You people always cry racism the second something doesn't go your way." "I did my job. I responded to a call. If she'd have just cooperated instead of standing there giving me attitude—" "She never raised her voice," Smith said quietly, still seated at the witness table. "I was standing right there, Sarge. You know that." Bailey rounded on him. "You'd throw away 15 years of partnership over this? Over her?" "I'd throw away a partnership built on a lie," Smith said. "Any day." Maison let the silence hang a moment before pulling out a printed page. "Sergeant Bailey, at the previous roll call, 3 weeks ago, Captain Romer Connor read your original incident report aloud, in front of the entire department. That report is already public record. It states the subject was combative and verbally resistant. This footage directly contradicts that report, word for word." Bailey had no answer for that. He sat back down slowly, the fight draining visibly out of his shoulders as reporters in the back scribbled notes and phones filmed every second of it. Maison set the page down and looked out over the chamber. "This committee has now confirmed, on the record, that the arrest in question was based on a false report and unsupported by any evidence." She paused. "But this appears to be part of a larger pattern. I'm entering into record 3 prior complaints from this same mall precinct, all involving similar circumstances, all resolved quietly through non-disclosure settlements." She held up the stack of files Natasha had handed her days earlier. "Every single one of these settlements bears the same authorizing signature," Maison said. "Deputy Chief Piper Schuyler." Every head in the chamber turned toward the back row, where Schuyler sat rigid, her face draining of color as her name echoed through the room. The chamber went dead silent as every eye turned toward Schuyler. She sat rigid at the back table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, the color gone from her face. For once, the woman who always had a procedural answer ready, always had a way to manage a situation before it became a problem, had nothing to say. Maison held up the first file. 2 years ago, a complaint filed by a mall patron, alleging he was stopped without cause, held for over an hour, and released without charges after loss. Prevention confirmed he'd purchased everything in his possession. resolved with a signed non-disclosure agreement. No further action taken against the responding officer. She held up the second. 18 months ago. Nearly identical circumstances. Same mall precinct. Same outcome. A quiet settlement. An NDA. No discipline recorded in the officer's file. She held up the third. 10 months ago. Same pattern again. Maison set all three down in front of her, side by side. Deputy Chief Schuyler, your signature authorizes every one of these settlements. Would you like to explain to this committee why 3 separate complaints, all describing the same troubling pattern at the same precinct, were quietly closed instead of investigated? Schuyler's lawyer leaned over and whispered something urgent in her ear. She shook her head slightly, then finally stood, smoothing her jacket like it might steady her voice along with it. Those settlements were handled according to standard department procedure at the time, Schuyler said, her tone clipped and careful. Each situation was evaluated individually and resolved in a way that protected the department from unnecessary litigation. They protected the department from accountability, Maison said flatly. Which is a very different thing, Deputy Chief. Especially when the officer at the center of at least one of these complaints appears to be the same Sergeant Bailey sitting in this chamber right now. A ripple went through the gallery. Reporters flipped pages fast, whispering to each other. Schuyler's composure cracked for the first time. I was managing risk. That's my job. If every complaint against an officer with a good arrest record turned into a public spectacle, this department would never function. A man's job is not to bury the truth so the department looks clean, Natasha said quietly from her seat, not standing, not raising her voice, but every word landing clean in the silent room. It's to make sure the truth doesn't have to hide in the first place. Maison nodded slowly, agreeing without needing to say so out loud. Deputy Chief Schuyler, this committee finds sufficient evidence of a sustained pattern of institutional cover-up under your direct authorization, extending across at least 3 years and multiple victims. Given the severity of these findings, I'll be recommending immediate suspension pending a full independent investigation, with likely referral to the district attorney's office. Schuyler stood very still for a long moment, the weight of the room pressing down on her. Then, quietly, without argument, without another defense, I'll submit my resignation this afternoon. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't remorse. It was simply a woman recognizing there was no procedural trick left to save her, no memo she could write fast enough to undo what had just been read into permanent public record. Maison turned next to Bailey, who sat slumped now, all his earlier fire burned out. Sergeant Bailey, based on the footage entered into evidence today, along with corroborating testimony and your own prior incident report, this committee finds that you falsified an official police document and conducted an unlawful arrest based on racial assumption rather than evidence. You are suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending termination proceedings. This committee will also refer the matter of evidence tampering, specifically the deletion of mall security footage, to the district attorney's office for criminal review. Bailey didn't argue. He didn't have anything left to argue with. Maison set down her papers and looked out over the chamber one final time, then turned toward Natasha. Captain Romer Connor, she said, and something in her voice softened just slightly. This committee finds no basis whatsoever for the administrative leave placed against you. That leave is reversed, effective immediately, along with any record of the fabricated complaint used to justify it. The gallery erupted into quiet applause, quickly hushed by Maison's gavel, though she let it happen a moment longer than strict procedure required. Natasha sat still, feeling something finally loosen in her chest after 3 weeks of carrying it. Not triumph exactly. Not yet. Just the simple, solid relief of watching the truth land exactly where it belonged, in a room too public and too permanent for anyone to quietly take it back. The morning after the session, Natasha walked back into Fairhaven PD headquarters with her badge pinned back where it belonged. The front desk officer who wouldn't meet her eyes 3 weeks ago stood a little straighter this time, nodding as she passed. Word had already spread through the building overnight. Everyone had seen the footage, read the headlines, watched the clip of Skylar's resignation get replayed on every local news station before breakfast. Nobody needed the details explained to them anymore. Natasha walked the halls slowly, letting herself feel it. Officers stepped aside as she passed, some offering quiet nods, a few even stopping to say they were glad she was back. It wasn't the applause from the chamber, but it meant more somehow, coming from the people she'd actually be leading from here on out. Maison's committee hadn't stopped at reversing her leave. Along with her reinstatement came expanded oversight authority specifically over the mall precinct, the exact place where all of this had started, now placed directly and permanently under her command, with new reporting requirements that would make quiet settlements like Skylar's a thing of the past. Natasha decided her first stop wouldn't be her own office. It would be the mall. She drove out that afternoon, walked through the same corridor where Bailey had first grabbed her arm, past the same stores, past the food court, until she reached the small security substation tucked behind the directory sign. The same metal counter was still there. The same plastic chair sat in the corner. A clerk looked up as she entered, eyes widening slightly at the sight of the captain's uniform. "I need to sign some paperwork," Natasha said simply. And the clerk scrambled to pull up the precinct's oversight file, sliding it across the same counter where her badge had once spilled out of a tote bag, in front of a man who never expected to see it there. Natasha signed her name slowly, deliberately, right where Bailey had once dumped her belongings to prove a point that had backfired on him completely. When she finished, she set her official captain's nameplate down on the counter for the clerk to display. Captain N. Romer Connor, closing a loop that had started in that exact spot 3 weeks earlier. Back at headquarters, through the glass window of what used to be Bailey's small office, she watched 2 facilities workers carrying out a box of his belongings, his nameplate already gone from the door. He wouldn't be back. The district attorney's office had already opened a formal criminal review into the evidence tampering, and department termination proceedings were moving fast now that nobody was left to slow walk them. Smith found her in the hallway a little later, looking more like himself than he had in weeks, shoulders back, no longer glancing over his shoulder before he spoke. "Captain," he said, "glad to see you back." "Glad to be back," Natasha said. "You did the right thing, Tristan. I want you to know that mattered. More than you probably realize." Smith gave a small nod, some of the guilt he'd been carrying finally easing off his face. "Doesn't feel lonely anymore, for what it's worth." "It won't be," Natasha said. "Not on my watch." Later that afternoon, Emily Frank stopped by headquarters on her lunch break, still a little nervous walking into a police station even now, even as a witness who'd helped crack the whole thing open. "I wanted to say thank you," Emily said, "for trusting me, for not giving up when the footage disappeared the first time." "You're the one who kept the backup," Natasha said. "That took guts, Emily." "Don't sell that short." Emily smiled, small but real, and left with a lighter step than she'd walked in with. By evening, Natasha sat alone in her office for the first time since her reinstatement, the noise of the day finally settling into quiet. Through her window, she could see the parking lot where she'd once sat behind the wheel of her car, badge confiscated, wondering if any of it had been worth fighting for. It had been. She thought about the mall corridor, the cuffs, the counter where her badge had spilled out, and changed everything. She thought about how close they'd come to burying it, and how close she'd come to letting them. She hadn't. Natasha looked out over the city lights settling in for the night, calm now, steady, exactly where she belonged. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.